10 a.m., day of the event. Liz parked in front of the entrance and stepped down from the 4x4 SUV, hurrying up the steps to the big glass double doors. She opened the right door and stepped into the foyer waiting room. As always, she was hit in the face by the smell of stale cigarettes. Never mind, it had been a no-smoking zone for a couple of years, and the acrid scent of gunpowder and dirty socks. She wrinkled her nose and looked around. Empty. A newspaper lay open on the floor in front of one of the hard plastic chairs that lined the walls on either side of the tiled floor. In front of another chair lay a paper cup, on its side a puddle of the black sludge spewed out by the coffee machine in the corner. Both chairs had weird piles of gray dust on the seats and on the tile floor in front of them. "Not keeping the place real clean there, Chief," she muttered, moving to the counter that separated the foyer from the back. She could see directly into the room where the dispatcher usually sat, through the glass wall behind the reception desk. Liz stood there for a moment, looking through the window at the dispatcher station. No lights, no sounds, and again she saw that strange dust. It was also dark, the only light coming from the windows behind her on either side of the entrance. She shivered, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Where is everyone?" she muttered, moving towards the door that led to the back offices. She pulled the door open, the hinges creaking in the silence. As she stepped inside, she noticed more of the strange gray dust scattered on the desks and chairs. It was as if the place had been abandoned for days, but she knew that was impossible. "Hello?" she called out before moving cautiously down the wide hall. Her eyes moved back and forth, scanning for any sign of life. She heard the tick-tick of the old analog clock on the wall above the dispatcher's desk. It seemed that older technology, like the analog clock, still worked, but the newer, highly computerized equipment was completely dead. The screens were dark, and there was no hum of electricity. Speaking of dark, she thought, spotting one of those long, black, rechargeable police flashlights sitting in its charger. She pulled it from the charger, sending up a prayer, and pressed the button. "Thank you," she whispered in the bright, white beam of light. Feeling more confident, holding the weapon-sized flashlight, she made her way down the wide hallway. The rubber soles of her athletic shoes squeaked against the black and white tiles. She moved past the office of the department's one detective, then past the area where the patrol officers filled out their reports. They also gossiped like old ladies and bragged about their arrests. Next to that was the break room. Further down the hall on the right was the chief's office, and next to it the armory. Across the hall on her left was the evidence room, and next to it the door leading down to a side hall to the tiny cell for overnight guests. The door to the maintenance garage was at the end of the wide hall. By now the hall was dark, and the only light coming from the flashlight she held. She pushed open the door and immediately heard a sound she was very familiar with. Her heart skipped a beat, and she swung the light beam towards the sound and quickly moved towards the large 8x8 dog kennel crammed like an afterthought into the corner of the surprisingly clean maintenance garage. Standing at the door, tail wagging, stood the 9-year-old black-faced Belgian Malinois, Dakota, her husband's canine partner. His upright ears twitched forward, and he panted slightly, his brown eyes tracking her as she moved towards him. "Dakota!" she exclaimed, unlatching the door and pulling it open, standing aside to let him out. He launched himself out of the cage, jumping up with surprising gentleness, as they'd practiced many times, planting his front paws on her shoulders to swipe her across her neck with his pink tongue. Then he landed on all fours, 90 pounds of muscle and fur, waiting for her next move. She squatted down to give him a reassuring hug. "It's okay, boy. I'm here," she whispered, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Dakota licked her face, his body trembling slightly, obviously grateful to be out of the cage. She did notice that his water bowl was empty, as was his food bowl, but had no idea how long he'd been in the cage. Beside her, he pranced a bit. "Yeah, you need to go outside, don't you, boy? Okay, let's go." She stood up, looking around the garage. More of the strange dust lay in a pile in front of one of the workbenches. She shivered. "We need to get out of here," she said, glancing down at Dakota. "Let's go find Wade and figure out what's going on." With Dakota by her side, she headed back through the station, her mind racing with questions. What had happened to everybody? Why was the newer technology dead? And most importantly, what next? She pondered that last question, speaking as they neared the reception area. "I guess the next stop should be the hospital, huh, boy?" She didn't expect a response, but was encouraged when she felt the soft nudge of Dakota's nose against her left thigh, his usual way of communicating with her. As they stepped outside, the oppressive silence of the town hit her again. The streets were still empty, and there was no sign of life. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. Dakota stayed close, his ears perked up and his eyes alert. "Okay, boy, let's head to the hospital," Liz said, hoping to find some answers there. She opened the driver's side door and held it open so Dakota could jump in. Then, as he settled into the passenger seat, she slid onto the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. She drove the few blocks towards the hospital, her eyes continually scanning the streets for any sign of movement. Nothing was moving besides a few birds and a cat that dashed out of sight behind a parked car. As they approached the hospital, Liz noticed more of the strange dust on the sidewalk leading from the visitors' parking area and next to a couple of the cars parked outside the ER. The building itself looked eerily quiet, with no lights or activity. She parked the Suburban, grabbed the flashlight from the bench seat beside her, and opening the door, stepped out. Dakota jumped out, then stayed by her left side as they approached the silent, one-story county hospital. "Stay close, Dakota," she ordered softly, feeling uneasy. At the entrance, she wasn't surprised when the automatic doors did not slide open as they approached. "Of course not," Liz muttered as she pushed them open enough for the two of them to slip inside, a strange odor rushing out as the doors opened. "Phew, that's nasty," she thought, coughing to clear her lungs. The sound of the doors scraping as they slid shut behind them echoed in the silence. Inside, the hospital was just as deserted as the police station. No beeps, no alarms, no monitor lights, nothing. The newer equipment was dead, while the analog clock above the intake station ticked away like normal. In tandem, the woman and the dog moved down the hall toward the door that opened to the actual emergency room treatment area, both alert for any indication of life. "Hello? Is anyone here?" she called out, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. There was no response, only the sound of her footsteps and Dakota's nails clicking on the tile floor. As she pulled open the door, Dakota suddenly perked up, touched his nose to Liz's denim-clad leg, and headed towards one of the side rooms in the ER. Liz, recognizing the nose touch as his signal that he'd found something, followed close behind, her heart racing, hoping to find answers. They reached the door, and Dakota pushed it open with his nose, peering inside. Liz followed a bit more cautiously, her eyes widening as she saw an older man of about 70 standing next to the treatment room bed. He was getting dressed, having just finished securing the shoulder straps of his bib overalls. He was muttering to himself about the lack of good help and how he was going home, but stopped at the sight of the black-faced dog and the pretty blonde who had just entered the room. Liz's "hello" was full of hope and confusion, and crossed with his raspy "Who are you?" And about time someone showed up. Liz stopped and watched Dakota as he moved over and sniffed the old man's hand, which he was holding out for the doggy version of hello. "I'm Liz Reynolds. Who are you, and where is everybody?" The silver-haired senior straightened up from scratching the top of Dakota's head. "I'm Ezekiel Thompson, but you can call me Zeke. Most of my friends do, and I won't tell you what my enemies call me." His clear blue eyes danced with laughter behind the lenses of his gold-rimmed glasses. However, the smile faded as he went on. "And I don't know where everybody is. My neighbor brought me in yesterday afternoon after I tripped over one of my baby goats and fell busting my noggin on a fence post." He continued talking as he sat down on the edge of the bed to pull on his work boots. told him I was fine, but he seemed to think just because I kind of passed out that I needed to be here. The fine doctor, said with a large dose of sarcasm, decided to keep me overnight for observation. Observation, my hiney! I ain't seen anybody since about 2:30 this morning. At least that's the last time that fat old nurse came in here and woke me up to see if I was alive. Finished with his boots, he stood up, almost falling back onto the bed, when Dakota suddenly jumped up from where he'd been sitting on the floor next to Zeke's feet. In a flash of brown and black fur, the dog rushed out of the door, disappearing down the hall and around the far corner. "Dakota!" Liz yelled out, running after him. "Sorry," she called back over her shoulder. "I'll be right back. I gotta find him." She was surprised to see Zeke following hurriedly behind her. "Right back nothing. I ain't letting you two out of my sight." He huffed a little at the surprise on Liz's face. "I may be old, girl, but I ain't dead yet. Lead the way." Suddenly they heard a dog's bark from somewhere ahead. Having volunteered here for a short time in high school, Liz headed toward the general patient wing, wondering what he had found.